All right, so I've got my ball file selected, and I've got options down here at the bottom of the layer, or the import window. So we are going to we want to leave create a composition checked, but where it says import as, I'm going to change this from footage to retain layer sizes. But what these three import features mean, footage will simply import that file as one object. So regardless of the fact that I've got individual layers, it'll come in looking like a flattened version of that file, is what we'll get. The other two are both composition layers, but they're slightly different. The last one is composition. Basically, it'll bring in that file, which is 1920 by, or 1080 by 1920, I think. I think it's a story format. And each of those layers will come in as individual elements, except that the bounding box on those objects is going to be the size of my composition window. So even though I've got a small red ball near the bottom, that object is actually going to be 1920 by 1080 at its full bounding box size. Composition retain layer sizes is actually the one we want. And what that's going to do is it'll bring all the different layers in as separate elements, but the bounding box on the objects will only be as large as the artwork itself. So the ball will just be the ball. So I've got that ball 2 selected. I'm going to select composition retain layer sizes with create composition checked and say open. And here's what it brings in. So the first thing we see is a composition, because we told it to make a composition. And the second one's a folder of all of our elements. So those are all of the layers within our file. And if I open this ball 2 composition, there's a composition to the size of my Illustrator file with each of the different layers in place as elements in my project timeline. And I can turn those off or whatever I need to do. So that's how we import files from outside of After Effects. And we're going to do that a lot. I mean, whether it's, I'm importing art files, but, we'll import video files, photos, all the same way. So there's our initial ball, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and import those channel locks that I showed you, the Photoshop file. So if I import a file, and here's those channel locks. This is a much bigger file, but here's those channel locks. And I'm going to come down here, and I want to do the exact same thing. It's going to be create a composition, but I want to make sure that my composition retains its layer sizes. And when I open that, where's layers? We're just going to accept this as it is. Sometimes with a Photoshop file, depending upon what you've got, I've got masks actually applied to a lot of stuff. It's just wanting to know if I want to merge each of the layer styles into the footage itself, which I do. So we'll just say OK. So here's the folder, and just the same way, there are my different layers, and here's a composition of those layers. And I can grab those and manipulate them independently. We'll do this a lot of times too for to create, sort of fake parallax effects and that kind of thing. But this is done specifically so I could animate the pliers themselves in different poses. So that's how we import files to start with. So let's jump back over to this ball composition. And Let's see what we can do with it. So I'm not sure, whenever you imported it, I'm not sure how long your composition is, but mine imported this at 10 seconds long. So as it is right now, if I play through this, it doesn't really do anything. I really kind of need for this to be shorter. 10 seconds was the size of the last composition that I made in After Effects. So it remembers and picks those things up. So I'm going to actually shorten this up. I mean, it's only got, 12, it's got 12 layers in it, 12 objects. If I do one per frame, so we'll just, I'm actually going to shorten this down to 5 seconds. So I'm just going to go up here to this ball composition in my project window. And if I select that, go up to composition settings, I'm going to change my duration from 10 seconds to 5 seconds. So remember, within that duration window, reading from right to left, the furthest right set of numbers is tenths of a second, the second set of numbers is seconds, the third set is minutes, and the last set is hours, separated by commas, or colons. So I got 5 seconds. Let's say OK. All right, so that makes this a little bit shorter. So we're going to do pose to pose, or frame by frame with this. We're going to actually sequence these layers. And that's the term for the sequencing. Basically, I created one layer for each pose of my object, right? So what I want to end up with is each of these layers only being like 1 frame long. We're going to do 1 frame long to start with. Actually, let's do this. Now that we've made this, if you select, now that we've shortened this down to 5 seconds, let's, just so we've got a second composition to work with. Select that composition, and you can either duplicate it, or you can hit Command D on your keyboard to duplicate. I just want to have another copy of this that made it ball 3, because I want to go back to it. So here's what I'm going to do. And if you want to watch me do this, then you can do the second one along with me. So I need to get all of these frames, or all these layers, shortened down to like a second apiece. But this is really pretty tedious to go through and to pull these all in narrower. So what I'm actually going to do is, let's see, I want to pull my timeline in. Oops. I want to pull my trim bar into about 3 seconds and magnify a little bit so that I can see frames. I'm going to put my playhead right at 1 second. And then if I select all of these, I don't want the floor. I got a floor layer that's sort of where it's going to bounce, so I don't want that one. But I do want layers 1 through 11. I'm going to select all of those. And if I hit, see if I get this right the first time. Option, I did. All right. So if I hold down the Option key and hit my close bracket key on my keyboard, it's going to shorten up, or it's going to trim off everything after my playhead. If I were to hit the open bracket option and open bracket key, it would trim off everything before my playhead. So hold down my Option key, and I want to hit my close bracket with all of those layers selected, and it shortens them down. It actually did 2 frames. Let me see if I think if I go back here and do this, that doesn't do what I want. No, that gives me 1 frame. So if I put my playhead at 0 and do that, it gives me 1 frame. But if I put it at 1 frame, Option, close bracket, that'll do it to 2 frames. I'm going to go 2 frames. We're going to do this. I'm going to do this on 2s. So now that I've done that, you see, I mean, wherever my playhead is, I see everything. But if I pull it out here further, everything goes away because I trimmed all of these short. So with all of these selected, if I right-click on them and go to Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers, what this is going to do is look at the length of all of these layers, and then it's going to actually offset them going up the timeline by that amount. So if I hit Sequence, we don't want them to overlap. Say OK. And it sequences them out over time. So that's about 2 seconds. And if I play this through now, and actually, so that this loops, let's do this. Let's grab our trim head, pull that in. And my ball bounces up and down. And that's in a frame by frame kind of a way. I didn't keyframe anything. This is much, I mean, and this process is very much exactly any, Looney Tunes cartoon you've ever seen or any cell-based animation is done exactly the same way. It's just I did this artwork with Illustrator rather than drawing it on a pad. So stop motion also works exactly the same way. So if you use an app like Stop Motion Pro to take a series, photos of a series of images, you can bring those all those sequenced images into After Effects, sequence them out, and get that stop motion effect. So I kind of start with this a little bit just because, I mean, this is a fairly classic original way of animating before computers started filling in the gaps. So, and this is frame by frame. This is frame by frame or straight ahead, like Alan Becker talked about. And that's what that's an example of. And it's looping because, my first frame, my first frame and my last frame are identical. I could probably actually cut out my last frame because right now they kind of basically duplicate that pose. Oh, no, I didn't. But that's how we do that. So I could have done this as a single frame, and this would all be smoother. I could have done this made this a 3, each one lasts 3 frames. So if we go back here to our ball 3 and open that file up, let's do that same thing. Except this time we're going to do this on 3s. So I've got a 5-second long timeline. Let's zoom in on this and set our playhead at 2 frames, because whenever it trims this, it's actually going to trim it at the 3rd frame. The 3rd frame is actually this area, this gray area between 2 and 3. So 0 to 1 is frame 1, 0, 1 to 0 2 is frame 2, 0, 2 to 0, 3 is frame 3. So I want to place my playhead right there, select 1 through 11, hold down my Option key, and hit my close bracket key. And once we're done with that, with these all still selected, we're going to right-click or control-click, go down to Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. We don't want any overlap, Say OK. Pull this back out. Shorten up our trim bar here to be the length of our frames. And then play that. And if we actually compare the two compositions, oh, here's a fun thing. Let's do this. So I've got this. Let's grab our ball 2, the first one that we did, or that I did. If you did along with me, grab it. If you didn't, don't worry about it. I just want to show you. I can actually drag this composition down inside of this composition. And I'm just going to slide it over a little bit so I can see. And there's a difference of animating on 2s as opposed to 3s. The speed, the pacing's different. The timing of it's different. It disappears because it lasts a shorter duration. So it disappears a little bit, but it picks right back up again on the loop. So I sequenced layers in a frame, straight ahead kind of a way, frame by frame, but I made each one, did it in 2s on 3s, get a slightly different effect. On 2s happens a lot faster than on 3s does. Depending on the effect you want, kind of makes a difference on how you'd choose to do that. But you can certainly animate this way. Most of what we do, we're going to actually do pose to pose, but I want to make sure you understand the different ways of doing this and what it means if you're going to actually do cell-based animation. A lot of people like to do it. In my motion class, I've got about 4 people that's all they ever want to do. But you can bring all those cells into After Effects and combine them with other stuff. So, but that's straight ahead, frame by frame based animation. And we can fake this kind of a technique as well. So I'm going to change compositions here. And let's go to our channel locks. And actually, my composition is a little bit small here, but the channel locks are too big. So I'm going to select my channel locks here, both of them, and now let's increase the size of the composition. Probably better to do that. So I want to be able to animate the arms of these channel locks, but right now my composition size is too small. So I'm just going to start by going to this channel locks composition, go up here, composition settings, and with my preview checked, I'm just going to make the width, I'm going to increase the width on this composition. As long as you've got preview selected, you can see this happen every time you let go of the mouse when scrolling it across. I just want it to be bigger. I don't want my channel locks to go all the way to the edge. That'll work. Let's say OK. Just with a composition, just the same way as we can in Illustrator with an artboard. You know how we can resize artboards in Illustrator? We can do the same thing with our composition window here. This is a very oversized piece of art. This is roughly 500 pixels square, but I made it big on purpose so that I could do a variety of things with it. So But with this, let's say I just want to animate, let's say I want to leave the bottom layer alone. So there's my bottom layer. Let's name this, oops. Let's select layer 2, hit return, and name this back. The back arm. And I'm going to lock it because I don't really want to move it. So underneath the padlock here on the side, I'm just going to hit lock. And then if I select layer 1, actually I'm going to rename it 2. This would be my top arm. Just to keep them straight. I'm actually going to animate this, the top arm by itself, in exactly the same way that we just did that ball, but I'm going to do it manually. So I'm going to start with my top arm selected. I'm going to go out here to about zoom in here. Let's go out here to about 2 frames. And this top arm, I'm just going to shorten that or trim that down. So option, close bracket, will shorten just that arm. See, so now because I shortened that up, trimmed it up, if I come over here to 4 or 5 seconds, it disappears. So I've got that. And let's zoom in here so I can see what I got. So I want to actually just animate this arm. So if I grab my rotation tool, I can come in here and animate that. Except what's wrong with that? It's really not where it should rotate, is it? Channel locks would actually rotate right on this pin. So I'm going to undo that. And remember, we can move the center point. The center point always has to be at the location that we want to actually transform something. So if I go up here next to my rotation tool and I grab this pan behind or anchor point tool, it's also Y on your keyboard is the fast way to it. Tap Y. We can grab the center point and slide it up here to the middle of this arm on the channel locks. And now if we go back here to our rotate tool, now it rotates where it's supposed to. So I've done that. I've got this set. So here's my top arm, and I'm just going to duplicate that top arm. Just duplicate it. And we're going to select this segment in the timeline. And I'm not going to automate this. I'm just going to grab this and slide it over. Actually, let's do that. Let's leave it in place. This one I'm going to rotate to just up about this. I think I like this, doing it this way better just because I can see where my last one was pretty easy from right behind. And I'm just going to move it a little bit. See how much I moved it? Just the littlest. And I'm going to duplicate that one then. And I'm going to rotate it up. Again, just the slightest. And after we do that, we're going to duplicate it. Yeah, actually, this is a lot easier. Rotate it up a little bit more, but a little further than I did before. Once I've got that into place, I'm going to duplicate it again, Command D. And we'll rotate this up just a little bit higher. Duplicate it. keep that same process. We're going to do that. And I think the next one, when I duplicate it, I'm going to move it quite a bit more. And I didn't make my composition high enough, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to move that one a lot more. Let's duplicate that. Do that. Duplicate it. Should have made this a lot bigger. I'm going to go all the way up like that. So the other thing in our animation principles that he talked about was timing. And basically, timing is the speed at which anything moves. So in a straight ahead animation style like we're doing right here, the closer the objects are together, the slower they're going to appear to move. And the further they are apart, the faster they're going to appear to move. And I don't know if I've done quite enough to do this or not, but we're going to find out. Let's do one more here. Duplicate that. Bring that all the way over here. Getting kind of nuts with it, but let's see what we get. Now if I select all of these objects, right-click on them, and remember, I'm only selecting my top arms because that's all that I'm animating. Top arm to top arm 10. And I go to my keyframe assistant, sequence layers. Now let's see what I get if I pull this in. And that's only about a second of animation. We'll see what I get. You see how the speed on that kind of changes? It's much slower at the beginning, but the wider apart those are, the faster it gets. But again, I created a stop motion kind of an animation out of a pair of channel locks, and all I'm really doing is animating one element. So the closer they are together, the slower it appears to move. The further they are apart, the faster it appears to move. And you can see it actually halfway decently happen there. This exact same process you could use. I mean, I could create a composition out of the pliers themselves over. If I want both arms to move, I mean, I could do that here, but I could create a single composition out of the two of them together, and then duplicate that composition and modify each of the compositions exactly the same way. Just do multiple parts, if that makes sense. I don't want to go too far with this, but I want to make sure we understand the concept. So that's a little bit of timing added to a straight ahead animation format. I personally like pose to pose myself, but if I need a particular style, this is what I'll do. And I kind of took that general process, and this is what I actually did with it originally. But it's the exact same process, by and large. Except I threw in some position movement, did them as a composition, spun, and actually I kind of grouped things together. I spun them around and combined a bunch of different techniques. But at its core, what I just did is how this was done. although I didn't pay as much attention to the timing of it. They're very close together, much wider apart. They also talked about slow in and slow out in those different animation principles. In After Effects, so this is the way you would do slow in and slow out, is you would do, for slow out, it's very close together frames, and they get further apart the faster you want to go. So you change your timing that way. In pose to pose, or when we use keyframes, we do the same thing by slow in, slow out. In that context becomes ease in and ease out. That's what After Effects refers to, just like in Premiere. That's what After Effects refers to with that easing. So that, remember we talked about whenever things move, cars speeding down the street, comes up to a stop sign, it doesn't just stop on a dime, It slows down and eases into that stop sign. That's what easing is. That's what slow in is that slow down in movement. Almost everything eases. Almost everything you animate. Actually, unless you're doing a robot that needs real jerky motions, almost everything you do should always ease in one form or another. The ball animation didn't need to, but this benefited from slowly opening and then speeding up. I could have done it the other way. I could have opened it really fast and then slowed it down as it got close to the end. That might have been more effective. But that's just the way stuff moves. So, and sometimes it seems a little exaggerated, but the thing about animation is a lot of things happen so fast that if you just do them in small increments, the way that you feel like they would naturally be, a lot of times in animation you'll miss those movements. So we exaggerate them a bit in order to make sure that the viewer sees them and to help carry off the effect. So that's, straight ahead. And, to the flip side, I could have animated this arm moving pose to pose as well. And allowed After Effects, keyframed it and allowed After Effects to control that easing. The artwork I've got, I could have done this either way pretty easily. Does that make sense? Following me? Okay. Let's see. So those open and close. What other items did I have in that folder? So I had a couple of others. There's a car in there. All right, so I've got this guy. So let's jump briefly from this to pose to pose. We'll just look at them both in this session, and then I'll probably have you animate something, sequence images to animate something simple. But actually, I'll probably use the car. So I'm going to import. There's the Illustrator file, Robbie. Make sure that I retain my layer sizes. And if I open this file, this composition up, eek, kind of small. That's all right. I want to be able to see this better, so I'm just going to add if I right click down here in my timeline, go to New, Solid, I'm going to put it back. What's that? Say it again. Oh. Thank you. All right. So, let me do that again. So I just imported import file. I grabbed that Robbie file that was in the stuff I uploaded. And oops, I wasn't paying attention. Let's do that again. Import file. Robbie, make sure I change it from footage to composition retain layer sizes. Open it. And now if I open that composition, and I'm going to add a background so I can kind of see all, so I can see all of them. So down here in my timeline, I'm just going to right click down here. I can either do it down here, or I can actually go up to layer as well. Go to layer, new, solid. Pick a color you like and say OK. You'll place a solid color in there and then just drag it to the bottom so we can see all of it. This Illustrator file is set up for a different purpose. So I guess I could do this straight ahead, I guess. I mean, I've got all the parts to do it. I could do this straight ahead pretty easily. Actually, maybe we'll duplicate this guy so I can come back in if I want to. But I've got the head, the body, and the arms. Each of the arms are all separate elements. And if I wanted to animate him, I could move my center points to key positions to do that. So let's say we just want to make his head wobble back and forth. Zoom in on him. Remember, if you hold down your space bar, you can pan around your workspace. I'm going to go back up here to my pan behind tool or anchor point tool and just grab his center point and drag it down to the bottom of his head. So now I can animate his head wobbling side to side if I want to. I'm just going to pose him. I'm not going to animate him for right now. But let's see. I can do the same thing with his arms. Grab that anchor tool, find, select his left arm. I'm just going to put that center point right up there, right about the middle of his shoulder. And we'll select the right arm, grab that center point, and move it right to about the middle of his shoulder. And then if I go back, grab my rotation tool, I can animate the positions of his arms. And if you want, you can do a pose to pose or a straight ahead animation with each of his arms. You just need to, so if his left arm is down, I can duplicate that arm. Oops. If I want to do that, I guess I should. Remember, I really got to trim those arms down. Select that, option, close bracket. So I'm just going to do the left arm. Gives me 3 frames. Let's go 2. There's his left arm. Let's do duplicate, rotate up. I'm going to go the opposite direction this time. Duplicate, 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 and each one you see I get closer and closer together. Kind of like that. And if I select all of my left arms, right click, keyframe assistant, and sequence. Should have gone up and back down, because I could have looped him. Let's undo that. Let's take him back down. With something like this, we kind of see pretty quickly how long our project window can get. All I've really done was animated one arm going up and down. But all those, sequence those. So that did something annoying. So here's something to point out on sequencing layers. You notice that my sequence is going backwards? After Effects remembers the order that you select things. So when I did this, I selected from the top to the bottom, and that's the way it's sequenced. So if I deselect everything, select the left arm, go to the top, and now sequence, keyframe assistant, sequence. Now it goes the right way. Time we got? Okay. No, we just did that through layer sequencing. And I can vary the effect, vary the effect on that as to how it moves and that kind of thing by the number of frames I animate at a time and that sort of thing. But any questions about sequencing like that? Yeah. How did I what? The Oh, how do you sequence them? Second, okay. So let me undo what I had. Zoom in here so I can see everything. So once you get all your poses in place, you just select your first one, and then I hold down the shift key, and that'll select all of them. You can do them one at a time, but if you just grab the first one, hold down your shift key, click on the last one, that'll select them all. Then if you right click on those or control click on them, keyframe assistant, and you're going to sequence layers. And you'll just accept that and say, okay, we're not going to overlap anything. And then to get it to loop, I just pull my trim bar back to the length of that. But again, the further apart the poses are, the faster they move. The closer they are, and the more of them there are, the slower they move. And I think that's kind of the important part there too, is that it's not enough just to have a small amount of space between them, but you've got to have a lot of them kind of in that range. But I kind of like stacking them so they're all overlapped so I can kind of see what I've got. One of the things that's nice about Adobe Animate is when you do that, it actually does what's called onion skinning, which After Effects doesn't do. But onion skinning takes all of the other layers and kind of ghosts them back so that they're not as prominent, so you can focus on the layer that you're trying to animate. So you've got this so did most of you do this with me? Or have you all done the sequencing step? What I want to do is save this actually, and we can look at it again. This would actually be a good one to carry on with, just for different forms of animation. Frame to frame is more work. It's a little more tedious than pose to poses and setting keyframes, but the effect is different. So it's like anything else. I mean, to get the effect you want, sometimes you got to put in a bit extra work, But the effect can be pretty satisfying too, especially when it moves really nice, We could combine this with, Puppet Pin would actually allow us to bend his arm a little bit, a variety of different things we could do with it, but for a simple little exercise, that works pretty well. We decide to do the left arm, we just repeat the process. It's just we got to keep track of where all of our layers are and all that good garbage. You know, I think in a piece like this, I would probably opt to, with all these selected, change the layer color. So that would be my left arm layer color. And if I decide to animate the right arm, I'd make those a different color so that as I look through my timeline and my layers list, I could easily pick out the different parts. So I could grab the right arm, actually maybe change that layer to pink. Let's make it a little bit more obvious, green. And I could start animating that as well. Come back here to about there, grab my right arm, trim it. And I did all this with rotations too. I mean, we could do the same thing with position, you know, moving things left to right and whatnot, but rotation is kind of the simple way to show this. So do that, duplicate. It just starts getting long is all. Right arm. And I didn't pay attention to the number of frames I was putting in there, so I ended up being a couple of frames long. Or did I? Oh, I ended up being short. See how his arm disappears there at the end? Because I don't have enough frames. If I want to cheat that, I can always just grab this last arm. Oops. Just the last arm. And slide it over to match. Any other questions on it? So what I would like you to do, so I'm gonna give you your option for today, since I know we got a project that's due on Thursday. You know, I gave you all those assets. What I would like to see, and I'm gonna save this video and I'll put it up. Did I give you guys the link to my videos, my YouTube playlists? No? Let me do that. Usually if I think to record while I'm doing a lecture, I'll drop it on a playlist on YouTube so you can go back to it later. But what I would like is for you to animate, there's the green ball. There's also a second ball file in there that's a little bit longer of a animation. Same thing, sequencing, that Illustrator file. You know, animate several different parts of him if you want to. I mean, do the arms, do the head back and forth, but practice the whole sequencing thing. You don't have to do it during class. You can work on your Premiere assignment for the rest of the class, since I know that's due on Thursday and we're going to have a critique on that. But I would like for you to finish these sequencing exercises. And I just did some things kind of quick there. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to details I should have paid attention to, but I just wanted to be able to show you. Give some thought to it, make them move, you know, kind of nice. But do it with sequencing. Don't set keyframes or anything. There's also a car in there. If you want to have a, I mean, there's a car in there, and it's a Photoshop doc, single layer kind of a thing. But where did I do? Is it here? Exact same process though on this. Just a car kind of racing by. The only difference is I did cut apart the PSD file so that I could make the body bounce up and down on the tires. So the tires are separate element from the body, but kind of moves back and forth at different paces based on, but again, the process is exactly the same. This, instead of rotations though, this all operates on positions, just changing its position. Moving it from left to right or whatever else. I mean, actually I'll probably redo this one because I kind of like this little illustration. But, you know, again, the principles that we looked at, like if you watch this car before it takes off, he backs up a little bit, you know. What would have been nicer if he would have settled back on the wheels. That would have given a nice sense of anticipation of taking off. It's in there, but it goes back to my comment earlier about exaggeration. Unless you really exaggerate it, you can miss it pretty easy. That was easy to miss. So I think if I were to do this again, I'd really kind of lay back on that. But I didn't really plan this one out very well, so I did the layer. I stripped the layers apart, or the wheels off of the body after the fact, after I'd done most of this. So it didn't work out quite as it should have, but you can play around with that too. It's, you know, sequencing is exactly the same process. All right?